Hello, everybody. My name is Claire. I'm one of the managers for Witching Hour Festival. Thank you all for being here. I just want to thank a few sponsors and talk a little bit about Dave before he comes up. If we could just thank Englert and Little Village, who are the presenters of Witching Hour, and then sponsors for the festival are Film Scene, Iowa City Public Library, which we are at, and also every event at the Iowa City Public Library is free. So if you know people that do not have a pass, still invite them to all of these lectures and discussions because they are absolutely welcome. Thank Raymond James Investment Group, Surly Brewing, which you will find their beer every venue that has beer, Iowa Shrimp Farms, Iowa Public Radio, Scope Productions, and the Tuesday Agency. Thank you all for, if this is your first time at this festival, for taking a chance on this festival. It's a different idea. If you were here last year, thank you for coming back. We're really, really happy with this year's lineup, and there are so many different issues to go over and shows to see. Thank you again to the library for having us. And then Dave Gould is going to give a presentation originally called For a Moment in Time, but is now called the 16-Week Experiment. I know a lot of you in here know Dave, and so he's going to be talking for a little bit about kind of how we are reimagining higher education and how we need to ask different questions of our students in school now. And then after this event, if you guys have different ideas of what you want to go to, I just want to recommend Amy Groth, who actually Dave brought to the festival. She was part of a large social experiment, and she's going to be talking about that at 4 o'clock, right after he's done, at the Mill, over at the Mill. And then tomorrow at 2, she'll be at Prairie Lights having a discussion on pursuing the American dream, and with Tim DeNevy, who will also be speaking at the festival. So let's give a welcome to Dave Gould.
Thank you. I'm particularly honored to be here for three reasons. One, Claire, Andre, Katie, Tori, the whole Witching Hour crew are not only friends of mine, but friends of my family. I guess number two, because my son is in from New York, and while he's heard most of this stuff over the past 28 years, I usually don't use PowerPoint at home, so this will be a new experience. And number three, because this is my community, and you're my neighbors, and so for that reason, it's a particular pleasure to be in your midst. I'm going to talk a little bit, as Claire said, about higher education, and so with your permission, tell a few stories and ideas of kind of my journey in it, and some of the conclusions that I have come to. I think first, I think it's fair to share with you that I am really an unlikely voice in the topic of higher education. In fact, it was very, very doubtful that the two of us would ever meet. At 17 years old, I had little interest in attending college. I had a collection of good friends, a part-time job operating a Jack-in-the-Box fryer. I played trumpet in my own band, and I saw little reason to change a thing. That is, until my father entered my bedroom one night and proposed a 16-week experiment. It was to give college a try for just one semester. If I didn't like it, I could simply come home. Dad believed that this was a pluripotent moment in my life, a word he hoped college would teach me, when any of several outcomes is possible. He was also worried that if I didn't go now, I never would. To truly appreciate that conversation, you must first know a little bit about my dad. He was born in Allerton, Iowa, in the midst of a blizzard as my grandmother was transported to the doctor in a horse-drawn wagon. While my grandfather was lucky enough to eke out a high school degree, the inability to get to school forced my grandmother to abandon formal education in the 8th grade. My grandparents were both hardworking farmers whose minds rarely stretched beyond Wayne County, which makes my dad's bold decision to wake up one morning, pack his worldly belongings into a duffel bag, kiss his mother on the cheek, and hitchhike to a foreign country called college all the more mind-boggling. My father was studying for his master's degree at the University of Northern Iowa's campus the day I was born. The letters he wrote during that time are filled with hopes and dreams for a son that he had yet to meet. Dad took the first position he was offered, teaching math at Maine West High School, and with 5 kids in tow, pieced together enough late nights to earn his PhD from Northwestern University when I was 10 years old. And I think it's important for me to be clear. This wasn't a strategy for advancement or a calculated return on investment. In fact, my father never left that initial job. Instead, this was a declaration on the importance of learning for learning's sake, a conviction, if you will, that education is not simply a preparation for life, but life itself. I'm not sure if it was the gentle manner in which he asked or the fact that he was still paying my bills, but I didn't have the heart to tell Dad no. Doesn't mean at all that I was planning on staying long, however. I picked the college closest to home, registered only for the classes I thought would be interesting, and in a weird way, that actually motivated me to be an excellent student. My thinking was that when I didn't return for the next semester, somebody might ask, whatever happened to that Dave Gould, whereby those who were paying attention would respond, I don't know, but I bet he's doing something big, just like that other college dropout running Microsoft. But with few expectations weighing me down, I slowly began to recognize the unique opportunity I've been afforded to stand outside the world for a few years and contemplate my next move. If I could live the life I wanted, what would I do? Recently, a friend of mine asked me to share my best memories of that time. They include impromptu art critiques in the hallway, bowling my first 200-point game, following musician Dizzy Gillespie onto a stage, and playing fierce backgammon tournaments with the girl I would eventually marry. The fact that none of these experiences took place in a classroom is not lost on me. Ironically, I have now spent my entire adult life on a college campus and recognize it as sacred ground. But this does not mean that I am unaware of the trends that threatens its effectiveness. They include alarming dropout rates, frightening levels of student stress, depression, even suicide, the falling value of a university degree, and the rocketing cost to get one. This is a good place to insert that money does matter, and it's important that our institutions of higher education impart young people with the knowledge and skills necessary to construct a livelihood of their own. The fear of living with too little or owing too much is real indeed. Yet despite the fact that less than 20% of students are doing anything related to their major 10 years after graduation, most colleges exhaustively work to prepare young people for specific practical careers at the expense of helping them prototype meaningful lives. On a cold, gray January day on the University of Iowa campus, my associate dean invited me to coffee. We had barely settled into our seats when she carefully revealed that our university had alarmingly drifted toward the bottom of the Big Ten Conference in student retention. Although she didn't know exactly why, she went on to explain that these weren't simply weak students. In fact, many of them were academically thriving. But for some reason, after their freshman, sophomore, even their junior years, they just didn't come back. How can someone be on campus for as long as 3 years, the dean lamented, and leave us so easily? Before we departed, I'd agreed to help. At that point, I had already seen many students drift away because they couldn't answer the fundamental question why they were here. Well, there is no doubt that people with college degrees have better outcomes than people who don't. For these students, that statistic isn't enough. They are looking for something more. Psychologist Mihai Csikszentmihalyi calls it flow. a state of being in which one becomes so engaged in activity or experience that nothing else seems to matter. Creativity expert Ken Robinson refers to it as the element, the place where the things you love to do and the things you're good at come together. Psychologist Martin Seligman describes it as the meaningful life, where an individual's signature strengths are used in the service of something larger than oneself. The dirty little secret, writes Daniel Pink, is that people who are intrinsically motivated, who do what they do out of the joy of the task itself, almost always outperform their extrinsically motivated peers. By the end of the week, I told the dean that I wanted to teach a new class. I learned many years ago the simple act of calling something an experiment somehow diffuses the pressure. Experiments, by their very nature, are about trying something new. And while the potential for failure is always there, the possibility that something magical can happen exists as well. In the fall of 2010, I took just such a risk and created the University of Iowa course, Life Design. Get myself to my right side, sorry. Through stories, lectures, and reflective writing, the class is constructed to help students discover what they're innately drawn to do. And to achieve this, however, required removing many of the traditional carrots and sticks that keep students in place. What happens when the threat of rote exams and mandatory attendance is removed? When students take notes because they want to remember a point and not because they fear having to recall it? When the objective is not simply a grade or hours towards a major, but a deeper, more meaningful education? Will they come? Several of my colleagues told me no and warned the idea was destined for failure. They asserted that today's undergraduates come with a sense of entitlement. Classes, they declared, are third or fourth on their priority list, learning for learning's sake even lower. Some students were skeptical as well. After years spent in uninspired classrooms taught by inaccessible professors, they would need a lot more than carefully chosen words to believe again. A month before the first Life Design class was scheduled to start, I stumbled upon Tony Hsieh's book, Delivering Happiness. Tony is the CEO of Zappos.com, an online shoe and apparel company, and the book chronicles his story from kid worm farmer to the $265 million sale of his internet advertising network, Link Exchange, through the entrepreneurial roller coaster ride that resulted in Zappos.com's success. As the title implies, the book also details Tony's evolving ideal that the value of a company is not measured solely by the bottom line, but by how well it enriches the lives of its customers, its employees, and the community in which it resides. In an age of corporate greed and scandals, the conviction that happiness is found in the act of bringing joy to others is refreshing, if not radical. I added the book to my syllabus and asked Tony if I could record a phone interview with him. Tony said yes, and then realizing his tour was taking him through Iowa City, suggested we conduct the conversation in person. I impulsively blurted out, "Why don't we do it in front of my class?" A secret most instructors don't like to let out is that students have a tendency to fall asleep in class. Yes, it's true, most try and fight it, few actually ever hit the ground, and eventually you get used to it. In fact, these days, if I start to see more than one student going down at a time, I quickly slow my speech and I try to take out the entire room. That kind of reception, however, is an instructor's worst nightmare when played out in front of a guest. As I have shared privately with Tony and publicly to many others, Tony's visit was a defining day in my academic life. Do you want to know what every student silently craves? What makes learning come alive and sets their hair on fire? They want to be inspired. They want to be inspired. Do you want to know how class ended that day? It ended with 100 young adults gathering up their belongings and following Tony outside the classroom, continuing the conversation in a gravel parking lot alongside his bus. Though my laboratory is a college campus filled with 18 to 21-year-olds, I think all educators dream of these moments. Maturity and scholastic capabilities aside, does a good elementary school teacher really approach her students all that differently than a talented high school one? Don't middle school and university instructors both strive to ignite their students and make the subject matter matter? Emboldened by the unexpected success, I began inviting every exciting person I could think of to come to class. Over the next couple of years, authors, chefs, magicians, activists, CEOs, and athletes alike passed through packed lecture halls to urge undergraduates to look for the things that make them come alive and then trust them to shape their future. One of my most memorable teaching experiences was when Ashton Kutcher stopped by. I kept it as a surprise to my students, and when he walked into the room, there was a buzz of excitement that I wish I could replicate in every lecture. Ashton and I hadn't had an opportunity to discuss what he was going to say beforehand, and I admit to being a little concerned that he could last an entire hour. What resulted, however, was one of the most thoughtful discussions I've heard on a college campus. Ashton spoke about his small-town upbringings and the bitter divorce of his parents. He shared the stories of the high school arrest that confined him to Iowa City and the big break that took him to New York. But there was one moment in particular that I have carried with me ever since. It was when Ashton asked my students to raise their hands to a series of questions. How many of you think you could be a fireman? How many of you can picture yourself as a CEO, an artist, an engineer, a teacher? How many of you could see yourself as a businessman, a CEO? And with each inquiry, only a scattering of hands would go up. And when Ashton asked, how many of you believe you could be the President of the United States, there was but one outstretched arm. Why? Why, implored Ashton? Especially when you're at a point in your lives when everything is still possible. Many of my students told me later that they promised themselves that afternoon to never put their hand down again. But as one semester rolled into the next, I began to see a new storm forming. In increasing numbers, these same young adults were returning to my office. They would enthusiastically share the great things they discovered, and then abruptly pause, reference a looming graduation, and plead, what's next? How do I plug in? Initially, I did what most people in my position do. I scrambled to make hasty introductions and write thoughtful letters of recommendation, all of this fueled by the fear of losing them. With an impatient world gnawing on the other side of a commencement stage, it takes little to get swept into a cubicle. And then one day, all grown up, the same people who had eagerly wanted to leave their mark on the world now sadly believe those dreams are just for the young and naive. It was time for another experiment. Daniel Pink opens his book, A Whole New Mind, with a bold assertion. The last few decades, Pink writes, have belonged to a certain kind of person with a certain kind of mind. Computer programmers who could crank code, lawyers who could craft contracts, MBAs who could crunch numbers. But the keys to the kingdom are now changing hands. The future belongs to a different kind of person with a very different kind of mind. Creators and empathizers, pattern recognizers, and meaning makers. These people, artists, inventors, designers, storytellers, caregivers, consolers, big picture thinkers, will now reap society's richest rewards and share its greatest joys. Pink proceeds to explain that an emerging conceptual age will require workers to be skilled in areas guided by the right hemisphere of the brain. These include design, story, symphony, empathy, play, and meaning. All of these senses are high-touch, uniquely human abilities that were less important in past eras. Going forward, writes Thomas Friedman and Michael Mandelbaum, we are convinced the world increasingly will be divided between high imagination-enabling countries which encourage and enable the imagination and extras of their people, and low imagination-enabling countries which suppress or simply fail to develop their people's creative capacities and abilities to spark new ideas, start up new industries, and nurture their own extra. To properly prepare young people for these new challenges, education must move beyond an industrial age model that emphasizes linearity, conventionality, and standardization. But simply preparing for a changing marketplace is not enough. Teachers must also unearth in their students the joys and benefits of helping others, while their worldviews are still forming. One study found that generosity in high school predicted good mental and physical health even a half-century later. Other studies have connected giving to both longevity and happiness. No one has yet realized the wealth of sympathy, the kindness and generosity hidden in the soul of a child, writes Emma Goldman. The effort of every true education should be to unlock that treasure. Faced with a senior design project, Avery Bang and four of her civil environmental engineering classmates proposed a radical idea to their professors. What if we actually built something? As Avery says now, to see a project from concept to implementation was not an experience I'd ever had, and I was about to graduate as an engineer. What Avery and her fellow students had in mind was to design and build a footbridge near the rural community of Yavina, Peru, to a population cut off from the only school, healthcare facility, and marketplace. This proposal promised profound change. Now the executive director of Bridges to Prosperity, Avery understands just how important that early decision was to a professional trajectory. It was the first time I realized that I could have a team outside of sports, Avery recalls, that I could rely on people. I had these four individuals who would do anything for me, and I for them in a setting where we were moving towards a common good. While smart corporations rightly identify creativity as their most precious commodity, far too often our education is trapped in an old ideal that rewards students with the best memories and bubble sheet exams. But the good news is it doesn't have to be that way. The great Kurt Vonnegut, author of such classic works of literature as Slaughterhouse-Five and Cat's Cradle, understood the spirit of a true academic adventure. Addressing his 1965 class as beloved, Vonnegut described the twists and turns their inquiry together might take. As was said to me years ago by a dear, dear friend, Vonnegut wrote on the course syllabus, "Keep your hat on. We may end up miles from here." Young people have the capacity to dream big. While frequently dismissed as youthful innocence, those who find a way to protect that fragile quality often make the greatest difference in the end. My proposal was to create a semester-long interdisciplinary class that focused upper-level undergraduate students on creating something real. And once again, my new course found Tony Shea. At that moment, Tony was in the midst of leasing Las Vegas's old city hall in the heart of the struggling downtown to become Zappos' new company home. But instead of reconditioning it into yet another stunning corporate campus, Tony decided instead to invest his money elsewhere, to the tune of $350 million in the community around it. In August 2012, I decided to travel to Las Vegas and see what is now known as the Downtown Project for myself. The boldness and vision of Tony's undertaking was inspiring, and by the end of the week, the University of Iowa's Reimagining Downtown class was born. Tony provided the students with a modest budget, charged them with creating an idea that would contribute to the Las Vegas community. He also requested that the class spend its spring break exploring the city and learning both what it needs and cares about. After a rigorous application process, 14 students were selected to participate in the journey. They stretched from a dance to a finance major and dispelled every myth that implies young people are somehow self-consumed or unmotivated. During the course of the students' journey, they produced 2 videos. And I'd like to show those to you. The first piece was created totally on their own. I mean, these I would see after the videos were actually weeks and weeks done. It was the first initial weeks of the class, and it articulates the challenge before them. Here's a taste.
Did you ever have a good idea?
Like a really good idea?
An idea that could help people.
solve a problem, make life, well, better.
An idea that would make someone say, why didn't I think of that?
An idea that woke you up from a dream just so you could scratch it in an old notebook or the back of your hand, or maybe just a sticky note.
Whatever happened to that idea?
What if you had been given the chance?
Why is it that only 1 in a million of those good ideas actually come to life?
Maybe it's going to find the right people to believe in you.
Dave Gould was the first to believe in us, and he had one hell of an idea.
My idea was, what if you took upper level students and spent an entire semester working together towards something that really matters? Could they do something remarkable?
So when Zappos CEO Tony Hsieh began revitalizing downtown Las Vegas, Dave created a University of Iowa course built on the idea undergrads could offer unique voices to Tony's project.
Eventually, all that was missing were the students.
I'd never heard of, an opportunity like this to do something really real in a community.
No longer does education feel like you're contributing, and that's a problem.
The culture says that we take from society and that we never make anything. This is a great chance to really prove to our parents, or to society, to our teachers, that we're more capable than they think we are.
What were you doing when you were my age?
We are brainstorming, trying to arrive at a singular idea.
And it sounds really cheesy, but I actually truly believe that we're like a family.
The obvious things are the easiest to ignore. So when we go in and do our thing, whatever that thing is, it won't work unless we all say, of course.
This is something really cool that's going to have a big effect rather than a letter A on my paper.
Eventually, in a few years, when everything does happen in the downtown Las Vegas area and everything succeeds, the locals in that area will kind of have this modest pride and of, being able to just look at a stranger across the street and know that we kind of went through this together.
They can actually see that it will affect their happiness.
What you hope at the end of the day is something you create, in turn create something else.
With one great university guiding us,
2 cities to collaborate in,
10+ mentors mediating,
our community pushing us forward,
a group of innovative 20-somethings, and a chance.
Well, 1 in a million just got a whole lot smaller.
and we need your help to get there.
Why? Because, did you ever have a good idea?
Midway through this semester, students presented their ideas to Tony and 2 of his senior leaders. The gathering took place in what is now the shopping, dining, and entertainment destination known as Container Park. But on this day, the students stood on fake grass, sandwiched by a couple large trailers as the 3 executives eagerly listened from a kid's picnic table. It was a great moment. By the end of July, the students had completed the groundwork for a community-based business serving raw vegan treats while inconspicuously educating downtown Las Vegas on eating right. The initiative was branded Sugarcoat with the educational component called Sugarcoat Ed. There was a second film that the students created, a closure, if you will, at the end of class that reflects on the real-world experience that they had, and I'll let you hear from them again.
It's actually kind of crazy to picture my life before this class. It's just such a profound part of my life.
You know, there's really only so much you can do through campus until this project.
Reimagining Downtown was a University of Iowa course based on Professor Dave Gould's idea that 20-somethings could solve real problems and do something remarkable in a community if they were given the chance. So give 14 college students $50,000 and partner them with the Las Vegas Revitalization Project. And for us, that something remarkable became Sugarcoat, our Las Vegas-based mobile vegan ice cream business, focused on educating people about health through exposure and a little bit of fun.
One of the most appealing parts of this class was just that we can be leaders and we were trusted to be leaders.
It just goes to show that if I feel like I have a good idea, there's no reason why I shouldn't just go do it, because there's always someone out there who cares as much as you do. And we did exactly that. By plugging into the real world as a part of our education and collaborating with people who believed in us, we were able to take our good ideas and make them great.
Whereas other classes at universities are just so streamlined, this class, it kind of sticks with you, and it's about all the relationships you're building.
It almost makes me emotional that such incredible people have come into my life from all of this.
It's affected each person in a different way, and I feel like it's made them grow.
Honestly, this class has changed the way I think about college.
I can tell that I have learned so much from it, and when I look at my diploma now, I don't think about all of those gen ed classes. I think about this class, and I think that is the future of education.
So the question is no longer just, did you ever have a good idea? But instead, how do we reimagine education to give every student the opportunity to do something remarkable? Because you never know who might have the next good idea.
While the course was named Reimagining Downtown, the larger discussion may have been about reimagining education. The lesson was simple. When given a chance, young adults will do amazing things, and it behooves us to create a world in which they can. Author John Irving once shared with me that when you are at a crossroads, with one path leading to a predictable outcome and the other into a mysterious forest where anything is possible, always choose the forest. As my students left Las Vegas for home, I elected to stay behind and help. I reasoned that scholars across the country, residing in academic institutions just like mine, are dedicating their lives to studying subjects that matter. Yet, far too often, this work doesn't find its way into the cities and communities that need it the most. Instead, it disappears into the publications upon which an academic career is built. And then there are the millions and millions of college students under their charge, longing to get their hands dirty and use their education to make a meaningful difference, not in 4 years, but right now. Our cities are not only perfect places for both of these entities to play, but ripe with problems and desperate for problem solvers. They need this type of scholarship, energy, and idealism, and my big idea was to use the city as a classroom, joining these disconnected parts and setting them in motion. My idealism was outmatched only by Tony's optimism to transform Las Vegas into the most community-minded big city in the world. It was the type of bold objective that required what MacArthur Genius Award winner Bill Strickland calls impossibility thinking. But just 14 months later, with both of our dreams dreadfully unfulfilled, I found myself making my way back to Iowa. Before I left, however, I stayed up all night and wrote Tony a letter. It ended with a story about Donovan Fitzgerald, a Las Vegas artist who had spent weeks trying to depict the ideal American city on cement pillars in the community space I'd helped open just months before. Donovan had made the unique choice of shunning building structures in favor of 3 female figures. Noting my surprise, Donovan explained that while buildings rise and fall, great cities all require the same principles: truth, goodness, and beauty. Each woman, he described, is meant to represent one of these values. I remember staring at the figures for some time before requesting one addition. "What is it?" Donovan asked. "A North Star," I replied, "so that we don't lose our way." In the vast night sky, identifying one's North Star can be a bit tricky. It demands us to struggle with big, timeless, eternal questions that have little to do with pragmatic, salary-focused concerns. Higher education needs to be a place for self-discovery. It must remain a safe house for dreamers and idealists. What gets lost in all the practicality is the evolutionary trail the humanities provide on how people have come to terms with being human. These are the same questions we are likely to ask ourselves one day when we glance up from our professions and see our lives. It is through our shared sense of beauty, writes designer Bruce Bow, that we will find not only the solutions that we need to confront the challenges of our future, but perhaps more importantly, the means by which we will inspire, engage, and excite each other to care. I guess one could argue that any significant experience alters the course of your life, and we will never know just how I would have fared had I chosen to forgo college. What I do appreciate, however, is that my music major led me to an art degree, that led me to a Chicago gallery, to graduate school, documentary films, an Emmy Award, and 2 HBO broadcasts, to Walter Payton, Dan Gable, John Irving, Ashton Kutcher, Tony Hsieh, Desmond Tutu, Shireen Ebadi, the Dalai Lama, and my wife, to teaching at the University of Iowa, to an associate director position in the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences, to piloting a new course, and then another new course, to revitalizing downtown Las Vegas, to working in gifted education, and now here to you. While I could never imagine that I would be experiencing this moment when nearly 40 years ago my father and I were sharing a quite different one, I can now see the footprints that connect the two. Thank you.